Hi again, friends. Sorry about the last video getting cut off short. I went to go get my coffee, which I got, but when I came back, instead of clicking play, I clicked stop. So, sorry about that. I am going to continue where we left off in chapter 2 right after this. What was I going to say? I forgot. I don't know. Okay. Well, let's get to reading then, huh? All right. So we left off where Martine told Mr. Grice that she would actually go to South Africa with Gwen Thomas, because remember, she can only say her full name, even though it's her grandmother. So yeah, here we go. Right from the start, it was obvious that everyone around Martine was much more excited about the new future than she was. A game reserve in Africa, said Miss Rose in awe. Just think, Martine, it'll be like spending your life on a safari. Mrs. Morrison seemed to be convinced she'd be eaten by a tiger. You'll have to be vigilant, she told Martine. But oh, what an adventure it'll all be. Martine rolled her eyes. Mrs. Morrison was the kindest woman in the world, but she was absolutely clueless when it came to the animal kingdom. There are no tigers in Africa, Martine had to keep telling her, not unless they're in zoos. Apart from that one detail, she herself knew very little about Africa. When she tried to picture it, all she could come up with was big yellow plains, umbrella trees, mangoes, dark faces, and a baking hot sun. She wondered if wild animals literally roam the streets. Would she be able to have one as a pet? Martine's mom had been allergic to animals, so Martine had always been kept away from them. But ever since she was tiny, she'd yearned to have one of her own. Perhaps she could get a monkey. Then she remembered the tone of her grandmother's letter, and the crashing feeling came surging back. Gwen Thomas didn't sound like the kind of person who would say yes to a primate living in her living room. If she even had a living room. For all Martine knew, her grandmother could live in a grass hut. At school, most of her classmates seemed to have forgotten that barely 3 weeks had gone by since her home had burned down to the ground, and she was hardly going to South Africa out of choice. You're so lucky, they kept telling her. You'll be able to learn to surf and everything. It'll be so cool. Listening to them, Martine thought that the one good thing about moving to Africa was that she'd never again have to enter the grim gates of Bodley Brook School. She didn't fit in there. Come to think of it, she'd never fit in anywhere with children her own age. But somehow it hadn't mattered when her mom and dad were around, because they were her best friends. Her dad had been the doctor who worked very long hours, but in the summer he took time off and they'd go camping in Cornwall, where her mom would paint and she and her dad would swim or fish, or he'd teach her a little first aid. And every weekend, come rain or shine, they always had fun, even if it was only making pancakes. Now it was over, and there was a hole in Martine's heart. On Saturday morning, the day before she was due to fly to Cape Town, Miss Rose took her shopping for summer clothes on Oxford Street in London. An icy gray rain was falling, and the entire road of a sea. Sorry, I can't read today. Whew. Okay, I'm going to start that paragraph again because I just keep stumbling over these words and I want to make sure that I get it right. On Saturday morning, the day before she was due to fly to Cape Town, Miss Rose took her shopping for summer clothes on Oxford Street in London. An icy gray rain was falling, and the entire road was a sea of frenzied shoppers and tourists poking umbrellas in each other's eyes, but nothing could dampen Miss Rose's enthusiasm. Look at these cute shorts, she said to Martine as they fought their way around the gap. What a great baseball cap! Oh, I can just see you in this stripy red t-shirt. Martine just let her go on. If the truth be known, she felt ill. Her stomach was a bubbling cauldron of nerves, and her mouth was dry with fear at the prospect of what tomorrow would bring. Whatever you think, she kept saying as Miss Rose presented her with clothing options. Yes, it's nice. Yes, I'm sure it'll be fine. She ended up with 2 pairs of khaki shorts, a pair of jeans, 4 t-shirts, a baseball cap, and a pair of tough camel-colored hiking boots. The only time she was forced to put up a fight was when Miss Rose tried to insist on a floral print dress. Martine, who had cropped brown hair and bright green eyes, had refused to wear a dress since the age of 5, and she had no intention of starting now. I'll get bitten by a snake if I don't have proper protection, she told Miss Rose. But surely you run the same risk if you're wearing shorts, protested her teacher. Yes, said Martine, but that's different. Have you ever seen an explorer who didn't wear shorts? Back in Hampshire that evening, Miss Rose cooked a farewell dinner for Martine. A roast chicken with crispy potatoes, garden peas, homemade Yorkshire pudding, and onion gravy. Mr. and Mrs. Morrison came over, and Mrs. Morrison presented Martine with a pair of binoculars that had belonged to an old uncle. To help you spot the big cats, she told Martine. Martine was very moved, particularly when Mrs. Morrison also gave her a large slice of homemade chocolate cake, carefully packed in a lunchbox for her journey. I wish you much happiness, dear, Mrs. Morrison said emotionally. Remember that you'll always have a home with Mr. Morrison and me. Mr. Morrison just grunted in agreement. He was a man of few words, but when his wife turned away to thank the teacher for the meal, he put his hand in his coat pocket and brought out a carved wooden box. To keep you safe, he said in a low voice, giving it to Martine. Then he opened his car door and started the engine. Ready, love? He called to Mrs. Morrison. See you then, Martine. Martine waited until she was alone in Miss Rose's spare room that night to open the box. Inside, she found a pink Maglite flashlight, a Swiss Army knife, and a first aid kit. She could barely believe her eyes. She could hardly believe her eyes. She laid everything out on the bed and spent several rapturous minutes reading the survival leaflet that accompanied it all. The generosity of everyone was very touching. After a while, she repacked her presents carefully, turned off the light, and lay on the bed. A full moon beamed in through the window, laying a silver path across the room. Despite herself, Martine began to feel excited. By tomorrow night, she'd be on a plane bound for Africa, and a life she could not even begin to imagine. For better or worse, fate was closing a door on the past. And that is the end of that chapter. We are going to start chapter 3 probably in a little bit. I might do some more reading while I'm sitting here because I'm just so comfy. So I will see you soon. I hope you enjoyed that chapter.